Hey guys, tonight we dive into a side of the Roman Empire you probably haven't stayed up thinking about, though after tonight, you might. Imagine you're half asleep on a straw-stuffed mattress, tucked in a domus somewhere outside of Rome, when there's a polite knock at the door. It's not the neighbor asking for lentils. It's the Roman state. They've sent a census taker. And he's here to ask you everything. You probably won't survive this, not the questioning, but the bureaucracy. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your location and local time in the comments, if you want to share where you're tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The census in ancient Rome wasn't just a head count, it was a social audit. It was the state opening your front door and looking around with a slightly raised eyebrow, quill in hand. Every 5 years or so, a census official would appear to gather data for taxation, military enrollment, and to satisfy Rome's endless appetite for knowing exactly how much grain a citizen produced and whether his mother-in-law was freeloading in the back room. You're there, in your sandals, hastily brushing last night's fish bones out of the doorway, as the official steps into the shade. He wears a tunic that's too clean for someone who claims to walk miles each day. In his hand is a wax tablet. His stylus already looks disappointed in you. This is the moment the empire starts to look at your life with numbers. The census was traditionally overseen by the censors, high-ranking magistrates who were part priest, part accountant, and part nosy neighbor. They were responsible not only for counting the people but also for evaluating public morality. So, yes, the guy writing down your olive harvest might also quietly judge your choice of toga. Historians still argue whether the earliest censuses, especially under the Kingdom and early Republic, were more about ritual or revenue. Some believe they were tied to religious festivals, others point to the financial motive from the start. Either way, by the late Republic, the census had teeth. And a clipboard. You, of course, don't get to say no. Refusing to participate wasn't just frowned upon, it was illegal. You could be stripped of citizenship privileges, barred from military service, or fined. In extreme cases, people who refused to register could be enslaved. So, yes, it's best to keep that mouth of yours cooperative and your property list ready. The census official squints at you. He's already annoyed you offered him wine before parchment. Time to begin. He doesn't start with your farm or your taxes. No, he starts with you. Your name. All of it. And if you think John Smith was enough, think again. Because your name is going to take a while, you clear your throat. The census official looks up expectantly, stylus poised. He's about to ask for your full name, not just your first name, but all the names that tether you to your family, your ancestors, and your tenuous place in Roman society. You start with your praenomen. That's your personal name, the Roman equivalent of a first name. But let's not get too excited, there are only about a dozen praenomina in regular circulation. So your name might be something like Marcus, Gaius, or Publius. If you're a woman, it's even more limiting, your name is usually derived from your father's nomen, which we'll get to in a moment, and then often repeated among sisters with major, minor, or numbers to differentiate you. Then comes the nomen. This is your clan or gens name, the Roman version of a surname. It says which ancient family line you supposedly descend from, even if your great-great-great-grandfather made shoes and drank vinegar wine under a bridge. A name like Cornelius or Julius links you to prestige, property, and all the scandals your ancestors tried to bury. And finally, the cognomen. This is the nickname or inherited trait-based title that often sticks for generations. If your grandfather had a big nose, congratulations, you might be Naso. If your uncle was short, you might be from the Paulus line. It's equal parts hilarious and humiliating. Occasionally, another name gets tacked on, the agnomen, reserved for victories or achievements. You don't have one. Let's not pretend. So you recite your full name, Marcus Tullius Crassipes Minor. The census taker grunts. He writes quickly, without lifting his eyes. You wonder if he's actually spelling it right. Probably not. You're not Cicero. Roman naming customs weren't just formalities, they were social scaffolding. Each layer of your name placed you in a hierarchy, determined which senatorial doors might open, and hinted at your legal status. Slaves didn't get full Roman names unless they were freed. Freedmen often took the praenomen and nomen of their former masters, adding their own cognomen. So yes, your name might very well reveal your entire personal history, whether or not you'd prefer to keep that part private. Historians still argue whether the complex naming system was strictly enforced at the local level or if rural census takers were often more forgiving, especially when trying to decipher whether Lucius was spelled with a U or a particularly floppy V. But in larger cities, the record-keeping was meticulous. Imagine wax tablets lined with name after name after name, layers of identity etched and re-etched, melted and recopied onto parchment scrolls. A never-ending symphony of syllables. Your neighbor down the road. Publius Aelius Gracchus. His twin brother. Publius Aelius Gracchus Minor. It's a miracle their mail ever arrived. You think of your cousin who tried to add an agnomen to impress a girl. Claimed he wrestled a bear in Iberia. The census taker scribbled, "No evidence of bear," in the margin. Names mattered. But not just to the state, they mattered to you, to your sense of self. In a world where citizenship could be bought, lost, or faked, a name was your social passport, stamped with centuries of assumptions. The census official underlines your nomen once. He glances up. Domus, he asks, your house. Who lives in it? He's not just asking for a head count. He wants to know everyone under your roof, everyone you're responsible for, everyone Rome might one day need to tax or conscript or punish. But you already knew this was coming. You motion to the bench inside. The list of names in your household is long, and some of them aren't exactly eager to be documented. You nod toward the open doorway. The census taker follows your gaze and squints into the dim interior of your domus. Sunlight creeps across the tiled floor, where someone has forgotten to sweep yesterday's fig stems. You clear your throat and begin reciting. First, the obvious ones: your spouse, your children, your aging mother who mutters at birds. The census taker nods. These are expected. But he's not just ticking boxes, he's building a portrait of your household structure, and every name you say is filed away not just as a person, but as a unit of labor, wealth, and moral potential. Romans used the term familia to describe everyone under the legal authority of the male head of household, the paterfamilias. That's you, lucky soul. Which means your responsibility doesn't stop with blood relatives. You mention your niece who's been staying since Saturnalia, her presence gets a raised eyebrow. How long? The census taker asks, stylus hovering. You shrug. Indefinitely. He scratches something into the wax tablet. You're pretty sure it isn't charming family reunion. Then there's your cook, technically a slave, but more family than some of your cousins. She's listed by name, age, and job. The census needs to know not just who she is, but what she contributes. Cooks are taxed differently from field laborers. They also tend to outlive their master's livers. The census taker moves on. Children? All of them? You hesitate for a second. There's the toddler who throws olives. The twins who may or may not be yours. And of course, your oldest son, who insists on being called Horatius after that heroic guy from the bridge, even though he still wets the bed. You list them anyway. The census doesn't care about namesakes. Just heads, ages, and whether they're likely to produce more taxpayers. Historians still argue whether census takers in rural districts recorded all household members with equal diligence, or whether some simply lumped extended families under the phrase, plus dependents. But in urban Rome, precision mattered. Every resident meant another fraction of grain allowance, another potential levy during war, another entry in the empire's enormous math problem. You mention your neighbor, Gaius, who sleeps in your atrium some nights after losing bets. Does he eat your food? The official asks. You nod. He's added. Even house guests count, if they linger long enough. Especially if they breathe your air and use your chamber pot. The Romans were extremely pragmatic about resource sharing. If someone was draining your household, the state wanted to know. There's also the nursemaid, 2 freedmen who now work for you but live in the garden annex, and a boy who says nothing but sweeps everything. You're not sure whose nephew he is, but he's been here since last spring. The census taker doesn't flinch. Name? You make one up. Quintus. The stylus moves on. The census is not an interrogation, but it can feel like one. It reduces the organic messiness of your home into a scrollable inventory. The warmth, the chaos, the grudges over stolen dates, it all becomes itemized. You think back to the last census. Your cousin Lucilla lied about her household size to lower her tax burden. She got away with it, until one of her freedmen sold her out for grain money. The fine was swift. Her mosaic floor is now property of the local magistrate. You resist the urge to embellish. You're not in the mood to lose your bathhouse access. The census taker reads the list back to you. You correct the spelling of one niece's name. He ignores it. The wax tablets look full already, but he flips to a fresh one. And your dwelling, he says, pointing vaguely upward. Where do you sleep, exactly? Apparently, where you live is nearly as important as who lives with you. Especially if your walls leak, you point toward the back of the house. There, you say simply. Behind the impluvium, past the triclinium. The census taker nods, stepping just far enough forward to peer into the dim corridor, but not so far as to scuff his clean sandals. He's asking, of course, about your domicilium, your place of regular residence. The census must tie each person to a fixed location. Not just because the state is curious, but because this information feeds into everything else, your local tax responsibility, your military eligibility, and your place on the grain distribution list, if you're lucky enough to qualify. You explain that you sleep in the cubiculum closest to the kitchen, which is warmer during winter and carries the pleasant smell of fennel seeds, though sometimes also anchovies. The census taker doesn't care about the smell. He only wants to know if this is your primary residence. He underlines something on the tablet. Historians still argue whether census takers counted individuals at their physical location or their legal one. It's messy. A traveling merchant might be in Carthage during the census, but his official domicile is in Ostia. So which city claims his tax? You, thankfully, are not a traveling merchant. You're here, right now, sleeping under this roof, in a room with a cracked fresco of Mercury and a mattress stuffed mostly with hay and ambition. The census agent gestures vaguely. Roof tile or thatch? You blink. Tile, mostly. He nods. Floor? You look down. Stone. With a mosaic lizard. He scratches notes. Romans cared about housing materials because they indicated wealth, maintenance obligations, and even fire risk. Thatched roofs burned easily. Marble columns suggested deep pockets, and deep taxes. Next comes the question of ownership. Is the house yours, or do you rent? You puff your chest. Mine. Though really, it's inherited, mortgaged twice, and one wall technically belongs to your brother-in-law. But who's counting? He is. You begin listing the property boundaries. 1 atrium, a garden no bigger than a senator's ego, 3 small bedrooms, and a storeroom that smells faintly of vinegar and regret. Any additional structures? He asks. You mention the outdoor latrine. Used by neighbors, he adds, raising an eyebrow. You consider lying. You don't. Even the presence of shared facilities is a data point. Rome was a city of dense living, where walls were thin and arrangements flexible. Census takers catalogued not just buildings, but the invisible agreements between families, patrons, tenants, and lodgers. There's a scribble on the tablet next to your name, shared access, drainage unclear. That sounds about right. You start to wonder whether they track how often you sweep, or whether your front steps are cracked. Then he asks, "Is this your only residence?" You pause. During harvest, you sleep in the farmhouse near the olive trees. And sometimes, during floods, you relocate to your cousin's upstairs room. You admit this. He scribbles again. It turns out, having more than one residence could raise eyebrows, or taxes. Some citizens tried to register in distant provinces with more favorable terms. Others claimed homelessness to avoid civic duties. Rome knew all the tricks, and the census was meant to catch them. Some scholars believe census officials used small markers, charcoal sigils, wax signs, even pieces of colored thread, to indicate homes that had been surveyed. A tiny thread on your doorpost might mean, "Counted already, do not disturb," or "Pending verification by grumpy cousin." We don't know for sure. Records are patchy. You look around your home. It's not large. Not grand. But it's yours, or close enough. And now, it's part of the scroll, woven into the statistics of empire. The census taker snaps his stylus against the tablet with a quiet little tap, like a librarian closing a very dusty book. "Next," he says. "It's time to talk about what you do. Your livelihood. Your work. Or, if you're between pursuits, your current method of avoiding it." He doesn't look hopeful. You shift your weight slightly, suddenly aware that your tunic has a bit of flour on it. From this morning's dough kneading, maybe. Or last night's flatbread disaster. Either way, you clear your throat and say what most Roman citizens do when asked what they do: "Farmer." The census taker's stylus pauses. He glances up. "What kind?" You blink. "A general one?" Wrong answer. In the Roman world, work wasn't just work. It was a tightly categorized part of your identity, and census takers were unusually curious about the precise shape of your labor. Wheat farmer, olive press operator, grape picker, bee whisperer. Each profession carried its own social weight and tax implication. You clarify. You grow spelt and a little barley. Some grapes too, mostly for household wine, but sometimes you trade barrels for cheese. You have a donkey. She's elderly, flatulent, and vaguely famous in the alley, but technically she counts as livestock used for transport. The stylus dances. You're being turned into data faster than you can think. Jobs in Rome were never just one-liners. You could be a pister, a baker, but if you also ran a public oven, suddenly you're subject to additional grain quotas and inspections. A cobbler who takes apprentices is no longer just a worker but a trainer. You once tried raising geese for extra coin. You omit that detail. Historians still argue whether Roman census takers truly understood the nuance of professions in smaller towns. Some records suggest that entire categories of miscellaneous laborers were invented simply to reduce administrative confusion. Others show extreme specificity: producer of bronze strigil handles or maker of perfumed glove linings. You wonder what your entry will say. The census taker leans in. Any side work? You blink. You mention the occasional betrothal cake you make for neighbors. Selling them? He asks. You nod. Noted. That, too, is taxable. He jots a quick line that probably translates to irregular baked goods enterprise. Fantastic. In Rome, your job wasn't just a means of income, it was a legal and moral indicator. Manual labor, for example, was often seen as beneath the elite. Yet everyone still relied on it. Senators couldn't technically engage in commerce, but their slaves certainly did, on their behalf. You work with your hands. You grow things. You patch your own roof tiles. The census taker notes this with an impassive face. You try not to read into it. The census wasn't just tracking you for fairness, it was organizing labor pools. During shortages, it knew exactly who could be conscripted for building aqueducts or hauling bricks. Your donkey might even get summoned, if the state's feeling bold. There's a pause as he flips to a fresh wax tablet. Assets, he says. Start listing. You glance toward your storeroom. This is the part you've been dreading. Not because you're hiding anything, okay, maybe a little, but because the definitions are slippery. What is an asset, really? That spare amphora you've been meaning to throw out? The broken loom in your cousin's room? He raises an eyebrow. Any property of value. Land. Tools. Animals. Anything that can be traded. You sigh and begin. You own a small plot just outside town. 2 olive trees, 1 productive, 1 stubborn. A mule cart. Some terracotta storage jars, a wine press that mostly leaks, and a few bronze utensils. He nods slowly, stylus moving in tiny curves. Everything is recorded, because every item you own ties into taxation. Wealthy Romans were taxed not just on income but on the perceived value of their goods. Even furniture could be calculated into your civic dues. You want to joke about your dented cauldron being more symbolic than valuable. You don't. The stylus looks sharp. When you mention your cousin owes you a goat, the census taker's interest perks up. Verbal agreement, he asks. Or written? You shrug. He shrugs back, and writes it down anyway. Suddenly, your quiet domestic life is beginning to feel like a spreadsheet with sandals. You wonder if they'll tax you for the moldy wheel of cheese in the cellar. You almost ask. You don't want to give them ideas. The census taker draws a final line across the wax, blowing gently to cool it. He stretches his back. Status of household complete, he mutters. He looks at you again. Now, he says. Let's talk about who's in your bed. Legally. You blink. You saw this coming, you stare at him for a moment, then glance inside toward the kitchen, where your spouse is humming off-key and butchering a fish. Married, you reply. 1 spouse. Still living. I think. The census taker smirks faintly. He's heard better jokes, and worse truths. Marriage in Rome wasn't just a personal arrangement. It was a civic contract, a legally recognized bond that shaped your rights, your children's futures, your property, and even your respectability in the eyes of the state. So yes, the census wanted to know exactly what was going on in your bedroom, or more accurately, your legal registry. He asks if you're in a manus marriage, the type where your wife is legally transferred into your family and under your authority, or if it's more of a free union, where she remains legally tied to her father's house even after moving into yours. You blink. The second kind, I guess, you say, knowing full well that the specifics were never entirely clear even during the ceremony. You think someone waved incense. Or maybe that was just your aunt. The census taker nods and scratches something into his tablet. These legal nuances might affect inheritance rights and dowry status, and by extension, the state's ability to tax any future transfers of wealth. Rome left no loophole unexamined. Historians still argue whether the census takers enforced rigid categories for marriage types or if local interpretations led to wildly inconsistent records. Some rural families lived together for decades without formal rights, others held 3 weddings just to ensure someone was paying attention. You mention how long you've been married, 12 years and counting. The census man raises an eyebrow. Any previous spouses? You shake your head. He marks monogamous beside your name. Though you're fairly sure the empire's idea of monogamy was more, aspirational than literal. He follows up, dowry still intact. You pause. Technically, your wife's dowry included a goat, for woven linens, and a half-interest in a clay oven. The goat died. The oven cracked. The linens were sacrificed to that one terrible winter. You offer a sheepish smile. Not exactly. Still, he notes something beside your marriage entry, probably summing it up as, functional union, moderate losses. Then comes the dreaded question, any cohabiting individuals, not legally joined? In other words, do you have a partner on the side? You hesitate. Gaius down the road was caught lying about his lover last census. His penalty? A steep fine and public ridicule via mosaic graffiti. You, thankfully, have no such arrangements, or none you'll admit. Just the spouse, you say. He watches you for a beat, then scribbles something down. You hope it's a faithful citizen and not definitely hiding something. Next up, children? Of course. You've been mentally preparing for this one. You list your 4 living children, their names, ages, and general temperaments. The census man only cares about the first 2. See, Roman law treated children differently based on legitimacy and age. Legitimate sons were your legacy, future citizens, possible heirs, and eventual taxpayers. Daughters? Important too, but less tax relevant. You explain that 2 sons are old enough for apprenticeship, 1 daughter is married, and the last child, an infant, is mostly known for screaming and chewing on furniture legs. He's probably not going to generate revenue anytime soon. He writes, 4 children, 3 viable contributors, 1 still gooey. You hesitate before mentioning the 1 child who died in infancy, years ago. He doesn't need to know that. Or maybe he does. Historians still argue whether census takers documented deceased children in earlier counts for context, especially if inheritance disputes were likely. Some records suggest that even dead infants were noted, just in case their name appeared in any legal claims. Others dismiss this as clerical paranoia. You decide not to bring it up. The census has enough of your life as it is. Then comes the legitimacy check. Were all your children born within legal marriage? You nod. The census taker narrows his eyes. Even the tall one? He asks. Especially the tall one, you reply. He scribbles. You wish he didn't look quite so amused. Finally, he moves on to domestic arrangements. Do you live with extended family? Do they rely on you for support? Your brother-in-law occasionally eats your olives. Your niece borrows shoes. Your cousin sleeps in the atrium when it rains. You sigh. Yes, you admit. All of the above. He adds it all up. 1 spouse, 4 children, 2 dependents, questionable goat. You smile faintly. That's about right. He flips his tablet closed with a soft snap, looks you in the eye, and says, let's talk about money. Specifically, who owes what to whom. You swallow. Here we go, the census taker gives you the kind of smile usually reserved for men who smell a debt. Any outstanding obligations, he asks, with the casual tone of someone already assuming the answer is yes. You sigh. Of course there are. This is Rome. Debts weren't just personal in ancient Rome, they were public identity markers, social contracts, and in some cases, inherited features of your family tree. Owing money wasn't always shameful, in fact, it was practically expected. What mattered was to whom you owed it, and whether they were in a position to forgive, forget, or ruin your life. You start small. I owe Lucius 3 sestertii for a broken amphora, you admit. The census taker doesn't even flinch. He's already on to the bigger fish. Any contractual debts? Land shares? Bonds? You shuffle a bit. There's the land you co-own with your cousin, technically his wife's dowry, technically under litigation. Pending dispute, you say. He writes, agricultural bond, partial ownership, legal status unclear. You're not sure whether that makes things better or worse. Historians still argue whether the Roman census included informal debts, verbal agreements, family loans, favors that had calcified into obligations, or whether they limited the record to registered financial contracts. Some papyrus fragments suggest that even unwritten debts were sometimes noted, in case they became taxable. The Roman state was nothing if not preemptively nosy. Then there's the reverse question, who owes you? You perk up a little. Yes, Gaius owes you 2 sacks of barley. Your nephew swore to repay you for that dented shield he borrowed during militia drills. And one of your tenants still hasn't coughed up last month's rent. The census-taker's stylus pauses. Any of those amounts substantial, he asks, which is Roman for, worth taxing later. You offer a shrug so neutral it belongs in a statue garden. Depends on the harvest. He smiles dryly and scribbles, minor receivables, non-monetary. Then comes the twist, do you hold any clients, he asks, eyes narrowing. Ah, the Roman patronage system, equal parts honor, manipulation, and social pyramid scheme. If you're a patronus, responsible for supporting lower status clients, typically freedmen, poor citizens, or small-time craftsmen, then those names might end up under your census entry. You pause. You technically advise 2 men on when to plant their lentils and help one widow negotiate with the local butcher. Sort of, you offer. Advisory relationships. Not financial. He hums and writes informal patronage, low yield. Patronage was about far more than money, it involved favors, introductions, public appearances. If your clients performed services for you in return, like voting a certain way or naming their children after you, Rome wanted that noted. It was political capital disguised as friendship. And if you were someone's client? You glance sideways. Well, yes. You do sometimes rely on an older senator to help you sort tax issues. He likes your wine. And your stories. And your wine-soaked stories. You admit this. Name? The census-taker asks. You give it. The stylus moves again. You're now officially a thread in someone else's social tapestry. Ancient Romans believed status flowed in complex currents, up, down, and sideways. Debts weren't shameful unless you defaulted. Patronage wasn't parasitic unless it turned political. And favors, even whispered over garden walls, could change census categories overnight. Any recent settlements or repayments, he asks. You squint. Lucilla returned my goatskin satchel. He raises one eyebrow. Anything, larger? You shake your head. Nothing worth the chalk it'd be written in. He nods and moves to the next line. Now, he says, tapping the tablet, we get to the people you don't own, but who can't leave your house without permission. You raise an eyebrow. Slaves? He smiles. Exactly. You straighten up and brace yourself. You knew this part would come. And whether you own 1 or 10, you'll now have to explain names, ages, skills, and exactly what Rome might want with them. And somehow, this part always feels the least sleepy. You take a slow breath and gesture toward the garden wall, where your oldest household slave is pruning a rather stubborn fig tree. That's Lidas, you begin. He came with the property. Knows how to trim vines, sharpen tools, and quote Virgil badly. The census-taker squints and jots notes. Age? 40. 42. Place of origin? Somewhere east. Cappadocia, maybe? He says it was hilly. He makes a noncommittal grunt. For the Roman census, slaves weren't just names, they were assets, units of production, walking ledgers. But they were also a social indicator. Owning a single slave meant you were doing okay. Owning 10 meant you probably dined reclining. You start listing, Lidas the gardener, Miko, who manages the storeroom, badly, but with enthusiasm, and Tressa, who cooks and has opinions about everything, including how you lace your sandals. They've all been with you long enough that you've stopped thinking of them as possessions. Still, the census doesn't care about your emotional attachments. Skilled or unskilled, the census taker asks flatly. You frown. Depends on the day. He doesn't laugh. He writes, 3 household slaves, 2 skilled, 1 semi-skilled, low risk. Rome categorized slaves meticulously, by skill, temperament, and resale value. A baker's assistant could be taxed differently than a grain porter. An educated Greek slave who tutored your children might cost you more to keep than your oldest cousin. You once heard of a man fined for failing to declare a literate slave. You hope Lidas never brags about that poetry again. Any minors? He asks. You hesitate. 1, maybe 2, depending on how you define minor. Under 12, he clarifies. You nod. Yes. A girl named Cinna. Mostly helps with laundry. He notes it with a dot and a brief low labor value squiggle. Historians still argue whether minors in slavery were systematically recorded or only noted when they reached working age. Some suggest that slave children were counted simply as future economic units, while others believe they were often omitted entirely unless the owner specifically pointed them out. You just hope Cinna never sees how small her worth looks in wax. Then comes the awkward part, personal slaves. The ones tied not to function, but to social polish. You glance down. Do you admit that you still have a slave who helps you dress on feast days? That feels extravagant. You cough. I have one who assists with clothing when needed. The census taker arches a brow. A valet? You nod quickly. Yes. But it's rare. He's also my cousin's son. Long story. He shrugs. Long stories don't interest him. Neatly labeled humans do. Do any of your slaves generate income? He asks. You blink. Like, how? Hired out? Leased to workshops? Rented for events? Oh. That. You mention that Tressa once baked wedding cakes for a neighboring villa, and Miko has been lent to the olive press twice in exchange for oil. Any formal contracts? Not unless you count gossip and a handshake. He scribbles, 2 with minor external earnings. Informal agreements. In the city, many slave owners rented out skilled slaves by the day, teachers, musicians, builders. It was a quiet economy within the formal economy, and the census tried to track it, if only so the state could tax every bronze coin of it. Finally, he asks the big one, any manumissions planned? That catches you off guard. You glance toward Lidas again. He's muttering to the fig tree like it's listening. Eventually, you say. He's earned it. The census taker doesn't nod. He simply carves a note, manumission probable, pending. The state loved manumission records. A freedman didn't vanish from the books, he graduated into a new tax bracket. He took a new name, swore loyalty to his patron, you, and often still worked the same job. Just with slightly less grumbling. You ask what happens if you free someone mid-census. He frowns. You submit a revision. You sigh. Of course. You look at your small, slightly ragtag group and realize something, you know their stories. The census knows their numbers. Anyone else? He asks. You shake your head. That's everyone. He glances at the wax sheet. Then we move on, he says, to the most delicate category of all, what you claim to believe in. And with that, religion becomes his next checkbox. You hesitate, because religion, unlike livestock or amphory, can't be measured by the cartload or written off as slightly cracked. It's slippery. Emotional. Personal. And in Rome, it's also public business. The census taker doesn't blink. What gods does your household venerate? He asks, as casually as if inquiring about grain weight. You start with the expected ones. Jupiter, of course. And Juno. We keep a small statue of Mercury by the front door. Is it regularly tended? He interrupts. You blink. We polish it during market season. He grunts. That'll do. In Rome, religion wasn't confined to temples. It was built into your hearth, your calendar, and your vegetable patch. The Laras, your household gods, were supposed to guard the family and its fortunes. Neglect them, and misfortune wasn't just superstition. It was civic negligence. So you list them: Vesta, goddess of the hearth. Saturn, out of family tradition. Ceres, because your spouse insists the crops grow better when she lights a little oil lamp in front of the pantry on Tuesdays. And you once muttered a prayer to Bacchus before a big wine sale. That counts, right? The census-taker jots, standard domestic deities, with supplemental practices. Then comes the follow-up. Any mystery cults? He asks, not quite meeting your eye. You blink. Excuse me? You know what he means: Mithras, Isis, Cybele, Orpheus. The imported, esoteric faiths that required secret rites and whispered oaths. Rome allowed them, mostly. But census officials liked to know who was lighting candles underground. Historians still argue whether census takers in provincial districts actively recorded religious affiliations, or if they only did so in cities where imported cults were more politically visible. Some believe these questions were skipped entirely unless the respondent looked particularly suspicious, or particularly Egyptian. You cough. I once attended a feast of Mithras. For the food, you offer. He raises an eyebrow. Initiated? You shake your head quickly. Too many snakes. He scribbles something. Probably passive interest, unlikely commitment. The census wasn't meant to persecute. Not directly. But religious affiliations told the state where loyalties might lie. A household with strong devotion to Vesta and civic deities? Probably stable. A family whispering oaths to Cybele in moonlit groves? More complicated. Any foreign rituals in the household? He asks. Offerings, objects, or altars? You think of the cracked blue amulet your cousin brought back from Syria, now hanging above your bed. Not really, you say. He hums, unconvinced, but moves on. Next comes the state festivals. Do you participate in Saturnalia? He asks. You nod. Of course. We invert everything. My wife yelled at me while wearing my shoes. He smiles faintly. Any sacrifices offered? You pause. A chicken. He nods. Acceptable. Civic festivals were part of what defined Roman identity. Participation, however silly, was expected. Not joining in made you look either rebellious or sick. Possibly both. He taps the stylus against his wax. Any priests or augurs in the family? You laugh. No, but my brother once read bird guts to predict a wedding. He doesn't laugh. Was it accurate? No, you reply. They divorced before the wine cooled. He still writes something. Religion in Rome wasn't about inner conviction, it was about external rhythm. Offerings, observances, and participation in the great theater of public belief. That's what the census wanted to record, whether you kept time with the empire's sacred calendar. Any funerary cults? He asks. Ancestral rites? You nod. We light lamps on the anniversary of my father's death. The dog howls until we do. Named? You pause. The dog? He sighs. The ancestor. Publius, you say softly. He writes it down. Just another name on a scroll. Finally, he looks up. Any declared omens or dreams that have altered household behavior? You frown. We moved the bread jar once because my niece saw a goat in a thundercloud. He gives a slow blink and writes, symbolic shift, non-standard. The census didn't always judge, but it remembered. And now, he says, with a tone like someone closing a hymn book, let's talk about your legal standing. Because whether or not you've ever stood trial, or should have, is absolutely next on the Empire's bedtime checklist. You stiffen slightly. Legal standing, you repeat, as if the words themselves might sprout thorns. The census taker doesn't blink. His stylus hovers expectantly above the wax. Any ongoing disputes, pending trials, or recently resolved matters in a curia or magistrate's court. You open your mouth. Then close it again. Roman legal life was omnipresent, like dust or pigeons. You could go to court for serious crimes, like theft or arson, but also for vague offenses like offending a magistrate's dignity or releasing pigs onto a parade route. You once watched a man argue for 2 hours that his neighbor's shadow was trespassing on his sun-dried figs. You clear your throat. I was accused of watering down olive oil. 2 years ago. It was dismissed. The census taker writes, minor commercial dispute, resolved, non-penal. Anything else, he asks, the tone of someone who's used to hearing the phrase, it wasn't technically illegal. You mention that your cousin accused you of tampering with boundary stones. Only because his goat keeps moving them, you mutter. The case is still pending. He writes, property dispute, familial, ongoing. Historians still argue whether all legal entanglements were included in census rolls or only those involving criminal charges. Some believe even accusations could tarnish your civic record, others claim records were cleaned every lustrum, every 5-year purification of the census, when the state tried to pretend everyone was slightly more virtuous. Ever been imprisoned? He asks. You shake your head. Not even overnight? You hesitate. There was that one time during Bacchus festival when you mistook a senator's statue for a urinal. Just a misunderstanding, you say. He hums and writes something anyway. Have you ever served as a witness? You nod. Twice. Once for a merchant, once for my aunt's will. Any conflicting testimonies? Not from me. Good. He jots down, witness, reliable, low frequency. In Rome, testimony wasn't just civic duty, it was status theater. Only certain classes could legally testify. And if you were proven dishonest, even once, you might be barred from future cases. Some people carried their testimony-worthy status like a family crest. Then comes the awkward part. Have you ever been flogged? You choke. Is that relevant? Yes. No. The stylus pauses. Accusations of moral infractions? You blink. Such as adultery, impiety, cowardice in militia service, harboring seditious texts, wearing purple illegally. You want to laugh. You don't. I once wore a friend's cloak, you admit. It had stripes. He blinks. How wide? You make a vague gesture. He taps his chin, then shrugs. Let's call it non-senatorial. You ask what happens if someone is found guilty of a moral offense. Depends on the year, he says. And the emperor. In some periods, those convicted of moral failings could lose property, status, or even their census registration, essentially becoming invisible to the empire. That was worse than prison. You could be erased with a stylus. Any appeals pending? He asks. No. Have you ever submitted a petition to the emperor or senate? You laugh. About what? He shrugs. Some people complain about grain weight or tax ratios. You shake your head. I try not to bother the gods. Or the senate. Still, he writes, non-petitioning, quiet compliance. The census could be many things, tallies, maps, personnel ledgers, but it was also a character sketch. Not a deep one, maybe, but enough to know who had ruffled what feathers, kissed which rings, or insulted which bearded marble bust at the wrong party. Ever served jury duty? You look surprised. That's a thing? Yes. But mostly for wealthier classes. Skipping it is a finable offense. You nod slowly. I've never been asked. He writes, eligible, overlooked, possibly forgettable. Finally, he leans back slightly and says, last question on legal record, do you currently employ any formal advocates, notaries, or scribes for household affairs? You blink. Does my cousin's friend who reads contracts count? If he charges. He charges in sausages. He smiles faintly. Counts. He draws a final line across the wax, then lifts his stylus, gives it a tiny, reverent kiss. Why do they do that? And declares, legal standing, acceptable, moderately tangled, generally harmless. You exhale. Somehow that feels like a compliment. Then he tilts his head and says, now, let's get into your civic obligations, militia, taxes, grain entitlements, and all those warm, fuzzy duties that keep Rome very awake at night. You groan, just a little. The way you might if someone offered you cold lentils for breakfast. Civic obligations, you repeat, in the same tone you once used for festering wound. The census taker doesn't blink. Let's start with the basics. Are you eligible for militia service? You squint. Technically is still serviceable. Military obligation in Rome wasn't simply about weapons and marching sandals. It was a patchwork quilt of expectations, exceptions, exemptions, and deeply creative excuses. Whether you served, or were supposed to serve, depended on your age, status, property class, number of children, whether you had flat feet, and how persuasive your uncle was at the last tribunal. You admit that you trained once with the local militia but were reassigned to logistics because your spear technique was described as passionate, but legally hazardous. The census taker scribbles, training completed, non-combat role. Historians still argue whether non-combat roles counted fully towards civic service requirements or whether they were discounted by certain governors trying to beef up their recruitment numbers. You just remember sorting scrolls in a drafty tent and nearly freezing to death during a drizzle-heavy October. Any deployments? He asks. You shake your head. We once defended a grain shipment from local kids with slingshots. He grunts. Counts. Next comes taxes, land tax, he asks. You nod. You farm 2.5 jugera, barely enough to bribe your way out of a feast. Livestock tax? You hesitate. Define livestock. Anything that breathes, walks, and makes noise on your property. You mentally count. 3 goats, 1 donkey, and my cousin's parrot. Does the parrot talk? Too much. He hums and writes, 4 taxable animals, 1 emotionally disruptive. Then comes the grain annona, the empire's infamous grain dole. If you live in or near a city, you might be eligible for subsidized grain rations. Are you registered for the grain roll? You nod. We get a sack per week. He raises an eyebrow. On time? You smile tightly. When the baker's nephew isn't drunk. He makes a note, recipient, irregular distribution. The grain dole wasn't charity, it was a civic glue. Rome fed its citizens not just out of kindness but to prevent riots. Bread meant peace. And census records kept that bread flowing, more or less. Do you collect for anyone else? He asks. No. Does anyone collect on your behalf? Once. While I was ill. My niece went. He jots it down. 1 proxy collection, familial. Then comes one of his favorite topics, public duties. Have you ever served as a severe? You blink. Like, in the parades? Yes. No. I don't look good in feathers. Severi Augustalesh were minor priests and civic organizers, usually freedmen or lower-status citizens chosen to manage local cults or processions. Some saw it as an honor. You saw it as too much walking and not enough sitting. Ever managed a census block? He asks. You stare. This block? He nods. You laugh. Why would I compete with you? He doesn't respond but makes a small, satisfied mark. Have you contributed to public works? Fountains, temples, paving stones? You think back. I helped fund a new sewer grate. He smiles faintly. A grateful empire thanks you. He writes, minor infrastructure patron. Rome was held together not just by emperors, but by everyday people donating bits of coin, labor, and stone to the general upkeep of things everyone used but no one wanted to pay for. Census records track these moments of reluctant generosity. Then comes the all-important, public appearance, category. Do you regularly attend assemblies? You frown. I stand in the back. Do you vote? When the line isn't long. Do you cheer? Loudly. When there's food. He nods. Passive participant, food motivated. Some believed civic participation was the beating heart of Roman life. Others just wanted the free olives. You suspect most were somewhere in between. Ever been summoned as part of a street cleaning duty? You blink. That's a duty? Yes. You missed yours last March. Your eyes widen. That's because we're out of town visiting an aunt, he finishes. We checked. She lives 2 alleys away. You sigh. He writes, avoid civic sanitation, creative excuses. Then finally, he flips a wax flap to a new tablet sheet and says, now let's discuss your greatest contribution to the Roman state, your household's annual census tax ratio. You swallow. Do I need to guess it? No, he says. You just need to sign it. He offers the stylus, and you stare at the blank, expectant wax square like it's judging your entire life. You're pretty sure it is. You take the stylus in hand, suddenly aware that your entire civic soul has been etched into wax tablets by a man who hasn't blinked since Saturnalia. He leans in slightly, as if ready to pounce should your signature resemble anything less than enthusiastic consent. You etch your name, slowly, because it's been years since you've signed anything more official than a bakery receipt. The wax resists a little. Your hands smell faintly of goat. It's all very Roman. Congratulations, he says in the same tone one uses after completing a ritual bloodletting. Your census entry is now valid. Provisional, pending prefectal review. You blink. Wait, what does provisional mean? It means if someone disputes it, or if the grain official disagrees about the number of goats, or if your cousin files a claim over that disputed boundary marker, your status may be recalculated. Recalculated as in, I owe more taxes. He smiles. Or fewer goats. Historians still argue whether these reviews were routine clerical follow-ups or quiet mechanisms for political vengeance. Some inscriptions show entire households downgraded between census cycles for reasons as petty as a neighbor's whisper. In the end, the census wasn't just data, it was memory. Rome didn't forget. It just filed. Now that your wax-etched fate is in his satchel, the census taker shifts to the final round. What you own that isn't human, living, or in debt. Do you own any buildings other than this residence? He asks. You shake your head. Just this one. And it leaks. He sniffs. Leakage is not a legal exemption. You glance toward the roof. A pigeon is nesting in a cracked tile. Noted. He continues. Storage facilities. Rental stalls. Wine cellars. You pause. There's a wine corner. He arches a brow. It holds 3 amphorae and a cricket. He writes, domestic wine storage, low yield. Then, tools of production. You show him a chipped olive press, 2 working spades, and what may or may not have once been a loom. Textile output. Occasional scarf. Metallurgy. Occasional belt buckle. He hums. Do you own a cart? Technically. It has 3 wheels. Can it move? If pushed downhill. He writes, partial vehicle, static, sentimental value unclear. Then he asks about luxuries. Do you own any ivory, coral, amber, or colored glass? You scoff. Does a cracked cameo of Neptune count? Condition? Missing his nose. He shrugs. We've all lost things. Any musical instruments? A reed flute. It makes 2 notes. Badly. He hums and jots, minor artistic holdings. In Rome, the census even noted aesthetic possessions, not because Rome cared about your interior design, but because luxuries could mean hidden wealth. And if there was one thing the state loved more than tax, it was missed tax. Do you keep bees? He asks. You blink. No. Any poultry? A deeply unproductive hen. Does she lay? She mostly judges. He jots something under livestock temperament. Next comes land inventory. Do you cultivate olives, grapes, barley, or legumes? Some lentils. Mostly by accident. Any irrigation? Occasionally I kick over a bucket. Any land leased to others? You shake your head. But your brother occasionally grazes his goats through your back lot. It's more trespassing than leasing, you admit. He writes, shared pasture access, non-financial. Then comes personal items. Jewelry. Ceramics. Mirrors. You list, 1 bronze mirror, 3 clay bowls, 2 intact, a ring that belonged to your grandmother's second husband, and a spoon you suspect is technically borrowed. Do you know its origin? You pause. The spoon? Yes. No. But it's haunted. He scribbles, miscellaneous utensils, questionable provenance. Finally, he asks, any non-citizen dependents? You frown. Like. Travelers. Boarders. Foreigners staying more than 7 days under your roof. You think. A merchant once slept in the barn. When? 3 winters ago. He waves it off. Outdated. Noted for tone. The Roman census extended its net wide, but what it couldn't catch, it still liked to hear about. Even rumors of guests might nudge a tax later. Then he asks, any pets? You smile. A dog named Brutus. He howls at shadows and steals figs. He writes, 1 canine, emotionally active, economically neutral. Finally, the census taker sits back. His tablets are full. Your soul is wax. And the pigeon on the roof lets out a victorious coo. We're almost done, he says. You're surprised by the pang in your chest. One final category, things too strange to fit elsewhere. Oddities, secrets, or mysteries the state may one day find useful. You blink. You mean like, what? Don't worry, he says, with a smile that's almost mischievous. You'll know when I ask. You stare at him, waiting for clarification. But he just adjusts his tunic, flips to a fresh wax tablet, and raises an eyebrow. So, he says, let's talk about the strange stuff. You blink. There's a section for strange stuff? He nods, as if this is the most natural thing in the world. Unclassifiable household objects. Unusual practices. Items of unknown purpose. Things that don't fit under property, livestock, or tax but might become interesting in the next civil war. You laugh, thinking he's joking. He is not. You glance around nervously. Does a lead figurine of Minerva holding a snake count? Where'd you get it? Found it in a drainage ditch. He hums. Could be Etruscan. Or plumbing debris. He writes, possible votive relic, lead, function unknown. Rome, as vast and layered as it was, liked to keep tabs on anything that might be magical, suspicious, foreign, or embarrassing. You once heard that a man in Hispania was fined because he owned a jar of black air. Turned out it was just olives that had fermented themselves into oblivion. The census-taker leans in. Any scrolls you can't read? You pause. Just one. It's in Punic. I use it to level the bed. He jots, untranslated text, domestic use. Historians still argue whether such documents were flagged for intellectual curiosity or political danger. Some believe unread scrolls were quietly collected and burned during certain paranoid regimes. Others say they were simply ignored unless they were wrapped in gold foil or smelled like treason. He continues. Have you observed any supernatural events within the last lustrum? You blink. Like ghosts? Or omens? Or talking birds? Or dreams involving senators and beets? You think. Well, the hen stopped laying eggs after I insulted the moon. That seems mildly supernatural. He jots, poultry-related omen. No action taken. What about buried items, he asks next. Anything you've hidden on the property? Statues? Coins? Bones? Your mouth opens. Closes. Define buried. If you covered it with dirt to hide it from someone else, it qualifies. You admit there might be a broken sundial under the fig tree. You tripped over it last winter and couldn't face the shame. He smiles faintly. We all bury things. He writes, one buried object, sundial. Status, shame-motivated. Then he gets more invasive. Have you experienced prophetic dreams? No. Have any neighbors claimed you smell like destiny? What? He waves it off. Just checking. You'd be surprised. You point out the cracked mosaic in your atrium. A tile arrangement formed a face last summer. Looked like Emperor Tiberius, only with more hair. Did it speak? No. Did it wink? No. He sighs. Then it doesn't qualify as a household miracle. He moves on. Do you collect anything? You nod. Pebbles shaped like animals. He grins. Finally, something delightful. He writes, unusual collection, geological zoomorphism. Do they serve any function? They make me feel superior to my cousin. He shrugs. That counts. Now he's just enjoying himself. Do you practice any rituals not sanctioned by official cults? You pause. I clap 3 times before entering the pantry. Why? To ward off pantry spirits. And mice. Effectiveness? Fewer snacks missing. Could also be Brutus aging. He jots, informal warding rite, pantry-specific, statistically unproven. The wax tablet is almost full now. He turns it toward the light and sighs in satisfaction. Then comes the last curveball. Do you own any items believed cursed, blessed, or imbued with the essence of a god? You squint. That seems broad. He shrugs. The census has to stay ahead of cult trends. You think. There's a spoon that's always cold. He perks up. Even in fire? No, but it feels judgmental. He jots, cutlery, unfriendly aura. Review if temple activity increases. You sigh. I didn't realize the census was also a ghost registry. He grins. It's everything. That's the point. You look around your home, your mildly haunted, poultry-judged, pebble-collecting home, and realize you've just declared its every secret to a man who files spoon temperatures under national interest. And now? Now, he says, standing and stretching his back, we take a walk. You squint. Why? To count your neighbors, of course. And possibly judge their fig trees. You rise reluctantly, joints creaking louder than your door hinge. The census taker already stands at the threshold, stylus poised like a sword, wax tablets snug under his arm. We begin with your eastern neighbor, he says, gesturing toward the crooked house where the tiles fall like confetti every other storm. You squint into the sun. You're going to count their tiles. Not officially, he says, but I make a note of things that may fall on pedestrians. You shuffle after him, half amused, half concerned that you've somehow become his apprentice. Brutus, your fig-thieving dog, trails behind you, probably hoping one of these neighbors has a softer yard. The census, you now realize, wasn't just about you, it was about your web. Your context. Who surrounds you, who might owe you bread or a punch, who borrowed your ladder and forgot to return it for 4 years. The census liked to see not just who you were, but how tightly you were woven into the empire's fabric. At the first neighbor's door, the census taker raises his stylus like a polite battering ram. No one answers. He frowns. Absent? Or hiding? You shrug. He claims to be a part-time mystic. The census taker marks, neighbor 1, possible itinerant, mild delusion. As you continue, he peppers you with questions. Do you share a well with anyone? Yes. 2 families. Any disputes over water? Only during droughts. Who wins? Whoever sends a child to do the shouting. He nods. Clever. Children are harder to find. At the next house, a widow peeks out from behind a curtain. She waves at you, then frowns when she sees the census taker. You mouth sorry with a weak smile. Does she live alone? He asks. With 3 cats, you say. Children? She claims the cats are reincarnated senators. He doesn't blink. Names? You grin. Cato, Cicero, and Gaius who hates bread. He jots, neighbor 2, elderly, feline religious affiliations. Historians still argue whether the census truly cared about the personalities of neighbors, or if these notes were merely the census taker's attempt to feel more godlike, scribing the dramas of mortals like an exhausted Olympus in turn. Either way, Rome kept records on everything. You pass a small alley, and he pauses. Any known informal markets here? You nod. A boy sells roasted chestnuts during Saturnalia. His cousin sells rocks pretending to be perfume. He hums. Do you patronize either? You pause. The rocks smell better. He smiles, writing, seasonal commerce, low threat. You reach the 3rd house, a large, vine-choked structure where a retired legionary named Marcellus supposedly lives. The door has no knocker. Just a broken sword jammed into the wood. Are you on good terms with him? The census taker asks. I once told him his soup was excellent. Was it? It was mostly water and regret. He jots, veteran neighbor, soup-based diplomacy. Marcellus doesn't answer the knock, but a curtain shifts. Brutus growls. You move on. Next comes a small garden plot sandwiched between 2 homes. Who owns this? The census taker asks. You hesitate. That depends. In summer, it's my aunt's. In winter, it's whoever needs parsley. He shrugs. Public ambiguity, normal in minor districts. He squints down at his tablet. Has anyone cursed you recently? Excuse me? Neighbor complaints. Slander. Threats involving geese. You think. I was once called a bean hoarder during festival week. He writes, mild social friction, legume-related. You round the final corner and arrive at a sun-baked square. A boy is chasing a hoop. A woman is shouting about figs. A man is arguing with a statue. It's normal. Are you part of a neighborhood watch? The census taker asks. Do dreams count? No. Then no. He looks around and jots more. Observations, atmospheres, impressions. The scent of garlic, the tilt of roofs, the approximate moral stability of alley cats. Rome liked its neighborhoods like it liked its senators, loud, opinionated, and slightly broken. He finally turns back toward your house. One last thing, he says. What is your role in this block? You blink. What do you mean? Do people come to you for advice? Help? Gossip? Are you feared, mocked, revered, or ignored? You think carefully. People borrow my wheelbarrow and don't return it. Ah, he says. The cornerstone of community trust. He marks, known borrower-lender. Low intimidation. High tool value. As you approach your door again, Brutus licks your hand and sighs. You've walked your census circuit. You've catalogued not just who you are, but who you are around. And as the census taker closes his final tablet, he says softly, now, let's finish where all things must, in the latrines. You stare. He smiles. Public hygiene is still technically part of the census. You sigh deeply and prepare for the least glamorous, most imperial part of your day. You stand motionless for a beat. You're joking, you say. Latrines? The census taker raises a solemn brow. Public hygiene. Waste management. Sanitation duties. It's not glamorous, but Rome doesn't run on marble and metaphors alone. You blink twice. You're about to take a census of poop? He smirks. Indirectly. But yes. And so, you trudge toward the communal latrine 3 alleys over, wondering how your life led to this moment, catalogued, scrutinized, and now followed to the city's stone toilet. Brutus, ever loyal, sniffs the air suspiciously and wisely decides to hang back. The latrine, like most in your district, is a narrow chamber with low stone seats, a shared sponge stick soaking in a vinegar basin, and absolutely no privacy. The scent is what you politely call historically accurate. The census taker steps inside first, nose unflinching. Do you use this facility regularly? You shift uncomfortably. When I must. He writes, shared latrine use, moderate frequency, likely dignity damage. Do you clean it? Absolutely not. Who does? You gesture vaguely toward a boy with a mop who may or may not be legally employed. He jots, unconfirmed sanitation attendant, status unclear. Historians still argue whether latrine entries were part of census duties officially or merely a side obsession of particularly fastidious census agents. Some scholars insist waste records were critical for estimating disease risk and civil order. Others believe Rome just liked pretending sanitation was under control. Any known accidents? He asks. You pause. Once, an old man dropped a ring into the hole. He went after it. Did he retrieve it? No, but we stopped him before he went elbow deep. The stylus scrapes, 1 ring loss. Retrieval thwarted. Potential hazard. You glance at the sponge on a stick. Do you, personally, own a private hygiene kit? Define kit. Sponge, vinegar flask, or imported cleaning tools. You hesitate. I have a rag. I wash it monthly. Color? Used to be blue. He hums. Wealth indicator, low. Self-care status, attempting. He moves to examine the drainage pipe. Yes, that's happening. He taps it with his stylus, listens for echo, mutters something about flow direction, then asks, have you ever witnessed an obstruction? You cough. Only once. A melon rind. It caused an argument. Between whom? Two merchants. One accused the other of sabotage. He grins. Excellent. Sabotage via fruit. He writes, drain incident, melon-related feud. You lean against the wall, wondering if there's a career path in describing toilets. Clearly, this man found it. Are there community rules about usage? He asks. Yes. Don't linger. Don't sing. Don't talk about politics while seated. Do people follow them? Mostly. Except for old Claudia. She tells love stories loudly. He nods and jots, elder orator, latrine-based, amorous themes. Then he turns to you. Do you ever bring items into the latrine? What kind of items? Reading scrolls. Dice. Snacks. You recoil. Absolutely not. He shrugs. Some people do. We track that. Rome was nothing if not meticulous. In a society built on order, plumbing mattered. The census occasionally tracked which neighborhood suffered the most clogged drains, most public complaints, or most sponge thefts. Have you contributed to maintenance funds? You snort. Only emotionally. No small donation. I once gave the mop boy a pear. He considers. Counts. You glance out the open door toward the street. Is this really part of the census? Technically, yes. Sanitation affects public health, which affects productivity, which affects taxation. It's the circle of strife. He wraps up his notes. Last question, he says. Do you know anyone who avoids communal latrines entirely? You pause. My cousin uses a chamber pot and empties it out the window. He nods. Name? You hesitate. I'd rather not. He sighs. Fair. But if someone dies from falling pottery, you'll be summoned. He finishes the last few lines, gives the sponge a skeptical glance, then steps back into the light. Congratulations, he says, adjusting his toga. Your hygiene profile is now complete. You stare at him. That's a phrase no one should ever say. He shrugs. Rome says many things no one should say. Now, back to your home. We must discuss your personal virtues and how honest you are about them. You groan, already trudging ahead. Behind you, Brutus rejoins with a hopeful bark. He clearly believes that the worst is behind you. Poor Brutus, you shuffle home with a mixture of exhaustion and dread. There's something uniquely Roman about being interrogated for your personal virtues by a man who just examined your communal toilet habits. Brutus trots ahead like he owns the street. The census taker walks behind you, humming, probably cataloging the gait of your disappointment. Back at your doorway, he doesn't sit. He straightens his spine, flips to a new wax tablet, and declares, "We now assess moral character." You blink. That's measurable? In Rome, everything is measurable. Honor, piety, reliability, these things affect civic trust. You wonder what part of your deeply suspicious hen affects civic trust. He begins. Have you ever lied to a magistrate? You tilt your head. Would I admit it if I had? He smiles. An excellent question. Which I will take as a maybe. He writes, moral ambiguity, refreshingly self-aware. Do you pay your debts? When I remember. Do you forget often? Only when I'm broke. He hums and jots, debt compliance, weather dependent. In Roman society, reputation wasn't just reputation. It was currency. A man's fides, his reliability, was almost as important as his land. Census reports sometimes included moral notes that could determine whether you got chosen for a council, or snubbed from a feast. Do you honor the gods? He asks next. You blink. Which ones? He nods solemnly. Excellent answer. You rattle off a list: Vesta at mealtimes, Jupiter during storms, Fortuna when gambling. You skip Mars. He never answered your prayers about the goat invasion. Do you perform sacrifices? He asks. You pause. Do lentils count? Only if the gods accept legumes. He writes, sacrificial behavior, economical, vegetarian inclination. Any recent omens? He adds. You recall a weird dream about 3 squirrels dancing in a toga. You decide not to mention it. He moves on. Do neighbors seek your advice? You smile faintly. When they're out of salt, yes. He writes, trusted for condiments. Philosophical advice, uncertain. Are you considered generous? You think. I give bread to the mop boy. I lent a blanket to Claudia. I once shared figs with a thief who turned out to be my cousin. He doesn't react. Do you share stories? Constantly. Most are exaggerated. He grins. Truth is rarely interesting. He writes, community narrator, unreliable but beloved. Historians still argue whether census takers truly had the authority, or gall, to assess virtue, or whether these assessments were simply their own personal vendettas coated in wax. Inscriptions in Pompeii suggest at least one census officer described a man as slightly wicked, but good at parties. Do you gossip? You hesitate. Not officially. Unofficially? Who told you about the melon feud? He grins and jots, gossip potential, medium, with narrative flair. He flips to the next tablet. Do you maintain your home? You gesture around. Define maintain. The walls stand. The roof leaks. The dog remains inside boundaries. He jots, domestic upkeep, bare minimum. Dog loyal. He peers up at your lintel. Any household shrines? You nod. Laras and Penates. I light a candle sometimes. When I remember. Or need something. He jots, ritual observance, occasional, need-based. Then comes the killer. Do you consider yourself honorable? You pause. Not because you don't know, but because no Roman ever really knows. Honor's a moving target. Sometimes it's dying in battle. Sometimes it's returning your neighbor's jug uncracked. You settle on, most days. He nods thoughtfully. That's more than some. Then he asks, have you betrayed anyone? You freeze. Is that part of the census? He shrugs. Only if it happened in the last 5 years. You exhale. My cousin. I ate the last honey cake and blamed his goat. He jots, betrayal, minor. Victim, family. Motive, sugar. Rome wasn't a nation of saints. The census knew that. But it liked to keep tabs on the scale of your sins. Enough to joke about? Or enough to exile you? The difference was often in the notes. Do you believe Rome is just? He asks softly. You look at him for a long time. On good days. He makes no note. Just smiles faintly. Finally, he sets down the tablet and stretches. You've passed the morality survey. You blink. Passed? I didn't say there was a grade. But your answers were honest, humble, and occasionally charming. Rome appreciates that more than perfection. You look down at your sandals, then back at your home. So, that's it? Not quite. We still have your death preferences to discuss. You stare. You mean, funeral arrangements? He winks. This is Rome. We plan everything. Even your goodbyes. You sit down on the doorstep, slowly, as if gravity itself has grown heavier with every new census category. I suppose it was inevitable, you sigh. We've done livestock, tools, dreams, and poop. May as well plan my funeral. The census-taker smiles gently, not mockingly. Rome is nothing if not thorough. Death, too, must be accounted for. After all, it changes your legal category. You raise a brow. From what to what? From taxable citizen to public burden. Unless, of course, you've planned ahead. You glance toward Brutus, who is chewing an unidentified sock and is unlikely to handle estate matters when the time comes. Fine, you say. Where do we begin? Do you have a designated burial plot? You snort. I can barely afford the floor I sleep on, let alone the dirt I'll rot in. He nods. Common situation. Cremation, then? Depends on wood prices. Noted. He writes, no formal plot. Cremation preferred, budget permitting. Roman funerary practices were a full-time economy. From extravagant tombs along the Appian Way to modest urns stuffed into communal walls, how you died, and what happened next, was as carefully considered as your taxes. Do you wish to be buried with personal items? He asks. You think. Maybe my reed flute. And a spoon. A good spoon. Symbolic? Functional. In case the afterlife serves soup. He smiles and writes, desired grave goods, music and tableware. Historians still argue whether such funeral details in census reports were filed for bureaucratic purposes or for posthumous shaming. Some records even include the quality of wailing expected, 3 mourners minimum, 1 professional, 1 cousin, 1 inconsolable widow. Any heirs to handle your arrangements, he continues. You hesitate. A cousin, maybe. If he doesn't pawn my shoes first. He jots, estate vulnerable to cousin interference. Do you want a headstone? I'd love one. Inscribed? Yes. Something poetic. Do you have a poem? You pause, then recite. Here lies a man, not rich, not grand. He tried his best with goats and sand. The census-taker actually chuckles. Touching. Rustic. He writes, gravestone request, verse, goat-themed. Do you want to be remembered? He asks. You frown. Is that a census question? Yes. Memory is part of civic value. We log monuments, inscriptions, familial rights. You think. I'd like someone to say I was funny. And honest. He nods. Even if it's only your hen. She's very opinionated. He jots, posthumous intent, comedic legacy. Audience, avian. Then comes the logistics. Do you own a funeral toga? You blink. They make those? He shrugs. Light gray, usually. Worn by mourners. I have a sheet. That count? Only if it's worn with conviction. You shake your head in disbelief. Is there anything not recorded by the census? He considers. Feelings. For now. Then, more questions. Do you want a procession? Only if it includes someone playing the flute terribly. Do you wish to be mourned publicly or privately? Depends who shows up. Do you want your dog involved? Of course. Brutus can carry the spoon. He jots, dog-integrated funeral, symbolic bearer. You glance sideways. Do most people really answer these questions? He shrugs. Most don't. But those who do get peace of mind, and often, fewer disputes after they're gone. You look away, to the horizon, where the sun is dipping lazily past the rooftops. It's the first moment of stillness all day. You'd almost forgotten what it was like to be quiet without someone categorizing your spoons. Then he breaks the silence. Any unfinished business? Confessions? Statements to be filed in the "If I Die Suddenly" annex. You think. Tell Claudia I liked her soup. And she can keep the blanket. He jots it all, quickly and efficiently, as if it's just as important as your goat count. Finally, he closes the tablet. That concludes the census of your earthly existence, he says, softly. You are now fully recorded, in life and in legacy. You exhale, deep, long, and vaguely embarrassed. Was it always this complicated? In every age, he says. We just pretend it's simpler because paperwork isn't poetic. You nod. But before you can rise, he says, there's one last matter. You blink. What now? Ghost clearance? Spirit taxes? No. Just this. He reaches into his satchel and pulls out a small wax tablet, the size of a hand, plain and unmarked. You get one line. A personal note. Anything you want recorded that doesn't fit into a box. You take the stylus slowly. And after a long pause, you write, I made people laugh. I made soup last. He takes the tablet back without reading it, seals it with a warm thumbprint, and slides it into a smaller scroll pouch, unofficial, unindexed, entirely yours. And for once, Rome won't file it. The light is fading now, casting long, papery shadows across the courtyard. You and the census-taker sit on your step like two philosophers who've spent the day dissecting a very confusing goat. He cracks his knuckles. Now, he says, the final pieces, your civic contributions and unpaid sins. You groan. More sins. Unpaid ones, he clarifies. Debts to the Republic. Or to neighbors. Or to yourself. You squint. You just spent an hour cataloging my cousin's fig theft and my emotional mop donations. What's left? Plenty, he replies cheerfully. He flips open a wax tablet with several blank fields titled things like unreported obligations, civic lapses, and mild betrayals. This is Rome, he says with a shrug. We measure even your forgotten apologies. You rub your temples. Fine. What's first? Have you ever dodged a civic duty? You think. I skipped a temple cleaning rotation once. Why? There was a traveling cheese merchant. He jots, temple dereliction, cheese priority. Have you ever withheld taxes? You pause. Do forgotten coins in a sandal count? Yes. Then yes. Accidental evasion, footwear compartment. Do you participate in public festivals? When they're fun. Define fun. Free garum, dancing, no fire juggler mishaps. He writes, festival participation, selective, condiment motivated. Have you ever voted incorrectly? You frown. Incorrectly? As in, voted for someone who later set fire to a bakery or declared war on Sicily by accident. Oh. Definitely. Electoral misjudgment, low-tier bakery vandal. Historians still argue whether Rome's obsession with cataloging every citizen's public engagement was a tool of imperial paranoia or just an early form of nosy democracy. Either way, civic laziness could follow you for decades. Do you speak in public forums? You shrug. I once argued about lentil prices with a fishmonger. Result? We agreed to disagree. Then bartered anyway. Forum presence, passive-aggressive, non-violent. Have you ever ignored an omen? You blink. That's a thing? He nods seriously. Birds flying backwards. Lightning without thunder. Cracks in barley loaves. Well, you say slowly, a mouse once squeaked during my dinner blessing. What did you do? Ate anyway. Omen neglect, rodent level. He smiles faintly. Rome notices those things. You shake your head. This is wild. He doesn't disagree. The Empire wants to know not just how you live, but how you fail to live perfectly. You sigh. Okay. What else? Do you own any unpaid favors? You blink. I owe Claudia's brother a bucket. How long overdue? 3 years. And a ladle. Owed goods, household, long-term lapse. Any abandoned personal goals? You think for a moment. I once swore I'd learn to juggle. He raises a brow. Why? To impress a traveling potter. And? She married someone who could speak Gallic. I gave up. He writes, personal aspiration abandoned, juggling failure. Romance related. Now the questions grow quieter. More abstract. Do you regret anything not done? You blink. Like what? Not singing. Not asking questions. Not visiting someone. That kind of thing. You pause. Then nod. I never told my uncle I liked his stories. He died 2 winters ago. The census taker doesn't write anything. He just nods slowly. Rome doesn't record everything, he murmurs. Some debts are just for you. He flips to the final wax page. All right. Last question. You brace yourself. In the grand list of things Rome might someday remember you for, what do you wish it would be? You blink at him. The street is quiet now, the bird somewhere nestled in roof tiles. Brutus is asleep against your foot. You whisper, I'd like to be remembered for trying. He smiles. Doesn't write. That's a good one, he says. But not for paper. You exhale. The wax tablets close with a soft click. The stylus slides into its little leather loop. The census satchel is sealed. The census taker stands. And for the first time since he knocked, he looks tired. You're fully recorded, he says. In form, function, memory, mess, regrets, spoons, chickens, and fig-related crimes. You blink up at him. Is that it? He grins. Almost. We still need to file it. You stare. Where? He nods toward the hill. Central office. Tonight? He shrugs. They never sleep. Bureaucracy runs on insomnia and salted almonds. You watch as he steps away into the dusk, silhouette fading into the lamplight. He turns once more and says over his shoulder, if you die tomorrow, Rome will know you lived. You sit back against your doorframe. The census is done. You've survived more questions than Jupiter could answer. And for the first time all day, you smile, not because you've been measured, but because in some strange Roman way, you've been seen. It's quiet now, properly quiet, the kind that only arrives when Rome finally tires of itself. The census taker is gone. Brutus snores softly. The waxy traces of imperial record-keeping linger in the air like the ghost of a bureaucrat's sigh. You stretch, stand, and shuffle back inside your modest home. The oil lamp flickers. Your ceiling creaks in that way it always does when a storm's 2 days away. Everything feels heavier, but also a little more settled. As though, somehow, the world acknowledged your existence in official ink. You sit down at your rickety table, glance around at your humble empire, half a loaf of bread, 1 cracked cup, 3 onions that may or may not be alive. All of it now legally known. Then comes a soft knock at the door. You freeze. It can't be. He wouldn't return, would he? You open it. A teenage boy stands there, wrapped in a too-big tunic, holding a scroll. He squints at you. You're the one who just got recorded. You blink. Apparently. He thrusts the scroll into your hand. Supplemental declarations, he mutters, as if the words hurt. You unroll the scroll slowly. At the top, it reads, Form X 11B, statements of correction, clarification, and mild self-defense. You sigh deeply. Because, of course, Rome has post-census paperwork. Did the census taker send this? No, the boy says. He left it with a baker. Who gave it to a fishmonger? Who gave it to me? I'm not sure I work here. You close the door gently. Inside, you sit down and read the categories. Did you misstate a pet's legal name? Have you since found additional chickens? Would you like to expand on any romantic regrets? Did you downplay a social feud for narrative simplicity? You snort. The last one hits too close. Rome wasn't interested in the truth, not really. It wanted the texture of you. The version that made sense to its endless scrolls. You, not as a soul, but as a sequence of categories wrapped in plausible poetry. Historians still argue whether the Form X, 11b was a legitimate follow-up or a passive-aggressive insult. No surviving copy has been found with all fields filled in. Some scholars believe it was satire, Rome's dry sense of humor poking at its own obsession with classification. You fill in only one blank. Would you like to add a final thought to the census record? You write, I'm more than my go-to-human ratio. You sign with a flourish, fold the scroll, and tie it with kitchen twine. You place it on your shelf next to your good bowl. You lie back on your bed, eyes toward the ceiling, and replay the day. From goats and lentils to toilets and funerals, you've been witnessed in every strange crevice of existence. And Rome. Rome will carry your data into the next century, even if your cousin still won't return the bucket. Outside, someone plays a flute badly. You smile. Claudia. Then, another knock. You groan, rise, and swing the door open. This time, it's just a neighbor, holding a pot. Did the census guy say anything about my fig tree? She demands. You lean in conspiratorially. Only that it's majestic and possibly haunted. She blinks. Oh. Good. She leaves, satisfied. You close the door again, lean back, and finally blow out the lamp. Because the last task, after every empire finishes measuring you, is learning to rest without having to explain yourself anymore, the night settles into itself, and for the first time since dawn, you're completely still. No one is knocking. No one is asking about livestock or virtues or sponge sticks. Your home is silent except for the whispery snores of Brutus, the occasional pop from the cooling clay walls, and the comforting creak of the wind brushing the shutters. You stare up at your ceiling and think about everything that has just been, well, censused. There's no part of you left uncounted. Your worth in wheat, your goat inventory, your bathroom habits, your unrequited crush on Claudia, your poetic aspirations, and even your death preferences, Rome now knows it all. It's odd, in a way. You expected to feel invaded. But instead, there's a strange calm. Like being picked apart and catalogued has, somehow, stitched you back together. You glance at the sealed scroll you left by the shelf, your Form X, 11b, the final flourish of a soul halfway between obscurity and bureaucracy. Tomorrow, maybe you'll deliver it. Or maybe you'll burn it with fennel and call it an offering to Fortuna. Rome wouldn't mind either way. The census may have been designed to serve the state, to calculate tax and military quotas, but for you, it's become something else entirely, a ritual. An accounting not just of what you own, but who you are, in all your mundane, mismatched glory. You, the person who eats figs too fast, avoids civic duty when cheese is nearby, and once tried to juggle for love. You recall how the census taker said, if you die tomorrow, Rome will know you lived. Well, maybe. But more importantly, you know now. The record will fade. The wax will melt. The scrolls may crumble. But the strangeness, the stories, the everything of you, it happened. And for Rome, for Brutus, for that neighbor with the haunted fig tree, you mattered. Wind down, 300 words. So now, at last, let the shutters close. The breeze turns gentle, threading its fingers through the trees, soft and absent-minded, like a friend sitting quietly at the foot of your bed. The city sighs. Its torches gutter low. And above, the stars blink with sleepy indifference to mortal scrolls and civic ledgers. Let your thoughts slow now, drift past the sounds of the street, past the clink of amphora lids and the soft patter of sandals returning home. You are no longer being counted. You are not being measured. The ink has dried, the wax has cooled, and your name, quirks and all, rests quietly in the folds of empire. Breathe in deeply, and let go. The census is over. There is nothing left to answer, no more categories to fit, no more questions hovering with stylus in hand. You are enough. You are complete. And you, dear sleeper, are now, finally, blessedly, unofficial. So curl beneath your blanket, however thin or worn. Listen to the hush around you. Let your limbs grow heavy and your chest rise slow. No ledgers. No labels. Just the simple, unrecorded comfort of sleep. Tonight, you are no citizen. No taxpayer. No goat keeper. You're just a gentle soul, drifting away into the dark, where even Rome cannot follow. Good night.